It's another beautiful day here at our Scholars Bog. Today's topic, mind reading, magic, and wonder in the digital age. What does magic, wonder, and awe have in common with technology? Is technology somehow supernatural? The Magician, 1909. A tarot card that for you might not mean a whole lot, but for others means quite a bit. What might magic, the magician, but wonder and awe generally and the supernatural have in common with technology? And what is mind reading? How might we make sense of that in the modern era? In the introduction to the book, Believing in Bits, in 2020 Oxford edition, the editors argue, when speaking about the MIT scientist and artificial intelligence innovator pioneer Joseph Weizelbaum, they argue that, quote, magic, he discovered, does not easily crumble away. It is an integral part of how people use computer technologies, end quote. Magic, it would seem, does not just simply disappear when we understand how computer technologies work. Magic is one of those terms that has so many meanings it's very difficult to pin down, but in the very least we might say that magic is associated with wonder and awe. It has been often said that disciplines like philosophy begin in wonder. These disciplines that ask big open-ended questions that are standing in respect and awe of nature, creation, the supernatural. It is wonder that draws us in and demands an explanation. Something that we're not free to just say no to. We need to understand. We're compelled to know and to understand, and it's this wonder that pushes us along. Well, in no small part, magic plays a role in that. And as I argued in my first video, religion has historically been that quest for understanding something, born of wonder and curiosity about the natural and supernatural. So what then might we say about wonder? Wonder is one of those things that is not born of complete objective knowledge. If you understand something completely, the wonder seems to cease, it seems to end. Is that happening with technology? Does that happen with religion? The more one studies the object of their fascination, does that fascination wane or ebb and flow depending on that degree of objective knowledge? In life, some things tend to be like puzzles. They can be pulled apart, understood, made sense of in some of their parts thinking. Other things are like a mystery that can't be solved, that can't be resolved, that don't allow us to have some sense of objective knowledge. I remember pulling apart my first toy as a child. I wanted to understand how the engine worked and how the two wires coming off this little tiny brass-like metal ball, and I pulled off the gears, I pulled off the hubs, I pulled off whatever was connecting whatever to whatever, and then I tried to stick these two wires on a battery. And sure enough, the engine worked. Well, I wanted to understand more, so then I pulled the casing off. Then I went inside and I saw there was wrapped up, looked like, I didn't know copper, I didn't know what wire was, but there was wrapped up wire inside. And of course I wanted to understand what was behind that. So I don't know if I cut it away or what I did, but I was able to get that wire off. And inside was just these little arms that would hold up the copper. And all the pieces on the table. Wasn't very fascinating at that point. It wasn't very interesting because while I didn't understand what copper was, I didn't understand electromagnetism, I didn't understand these larger, deeper physical principles, once I had reduced this toy that I enjoyed playing with to its basic parts, well, that same awe had disappeared. Well, is life like that? Is life, once we've pulled apart nature, right down to its atoms, and we understand subatomic particles and how things work, well, we no longer wonder? Or will there always be a role for magic and awe? Recall my earlier quote. Let me quote again from Weizelbaum, in this case 1966, and he wrote, quote, once a particular program is unmasked, so computer programs, once its inner workings are explained in language sufficiently plain to induce understanding, its magic crumbles away. This is his earlier view. Once we understand how computers work, how the language of programming works, we can make that connection, the magic crumbles away. Well, that's a view that he didn't hold for very long. And it seems even now, decades later, there's still a shine of awe or wonder, an illumination of enthusiasm for technology, even though we could take a computer science class, we could take a computer engineering class and figure these things out. even then, I argue there will be a sense of magic in the technology itself. You may be asking yourself a different question. Should technology be magical? Are we holding on to vestiges of a poor way of thinking, an ideology of the unexplainable, the mysterious, when we think of technology that we shouldn't? Maybe you think the modern enlightened self shouldn't be involved with these feelings of wonder and awe in the magical in technology. In other words, the technology is only magical to people who are ignorant of how technology works. I'm not sure that I buy that. We might all readily agree that computers are rational machines. They run on rational principles, binary code, programs, and that these things are not themselves magical, that they have a source and something we might call objective knowledge. However, as creatures, we're not rational machines. We often perceive the world around ourselves as irrational, or in the very least non-rational. Recall my first lecture. So whether or not you think we should be treating computers and technology in a purely rational fashion almost seems to be a non-issue, because we are likely not to. We're likely to imbue it, anthropomorphize it, make it personable, make it mysterious, even divine. That just seems to be something our species likes to do. And so when humans make the non-magical magical, or we make the digital magical, and we respond in wonder and awe, what are some of the implications, and what does that mean in the context of our conversation about religion? Think of it like a game of Jenga. If I was to say to you, technology, computers, this online digiverse in which we live is just the sum of its parts, that's not very satisfying. Just as if I were to say Jenga, which is wooden blocks stacked up in a tower, is just a bunch of wooden blocks. In fact, when you try to take those blocks out one by one and you're in competition with other people to make sure the tower doesn't fall, you want to be the person to pull out the last piece before it falls, there's a fun factor there. There's an enjoyment, an experience, and an awareness. There's a social gathering there. There's communication with it. There's relationality with other people. There's so much going around because of these parts, these pieces of wood, and they're just pieces of wood. There's an epiphenomena. There's something more above or beyond. So in that sense, that's how we're talking about technology in the digital age in the context of religion, magic, and wonder. Let's define supernatural. Supernatural is as it sounds. There's something more above or meta-natural. Nature, it can be measured, it can be weighed to a large degree. There are many things still can't be weighed or measured, but for the most part, we can figure out how much water is in this pond and how much organic matter. We can find these things out. The supernatural says, well, there's something that does not obey physical laws. There's something that may be miraculous. There's something quirky about it. And that's that feeling of watching a stage show in Vegas when you see the magician do something profound that you know in your head is an optical illusion, but you still feel as if it does not obey natural laws. There's just something off about it. So when I saw the woman saw it in half, I knew he didn't really saw her in half, but secretly I was looking for blood. Okay, not secretly, I was looking for blood. The easiest way to define supernatural is to say that it cannot be explained using natural laws. And what's tricky about that is, I bet no one computer scientist can fully explain the inner workings of a computer, or a computer programmer, or I was talking to someone yesterday who deals with software, with digital cameras, works with Tesla, and he was explaining how his work in the programming and what's involved in making these cameras actually work. I bet no one of him could explain all of these things. In other words, all of us have limited understanding of the universe around us. That's not to say that it is inherently magical or cannot be known, but to say that we all must live with some sense of wonder because we don't all know it all. But to take things even further, the editors of Believing in Bits argue, quote, that religious beliefs are inextricably linked to the functioning of digital media, end quote. Just think about that for a second. It's not just that religions, or those who are spiritual, rely upon digital technology, maybe an email blast at your church that asks for a prayer chain to help someone be healed, or maybe a televangelist who tells you to reach out and touch your television screen and you feel healed. These are obvious examples of religion and technology blending. But the argument they make, again, is that religious beliefs are built into or in the very core of how digital media works. That's an interesting argument. I don't think you can see it, but there are about 15 beautiful fish, all small but very colorful, panfish. Do you believe in digital technology? Think about that phrase for a moment. Do I believe in technology. And what would that mean? Here's Steve Jobs, the economist. He has that holy aura about him, robes like he's Jesus. There's something special going on here, and he's holding up an iPad. This is 2010 iPad. Quote from the economist: "The enthusiasm of the Apple faithful may be overdone, but Mr. Jobs' record suggests that when he blesses a market, it takes off." How many people believe in Apple, like genuinely believe in Apple to that degree that it becomes something like a religion? And is it supernatural? And is it connected with this sense of awe and wonder? Is the iPad, in other words, magical? For some people, it genuinely feels like it is. It's okay if we don't agree that Apple is religious or Apple is supernatural. It's okay if we think, no, Apple can be explained using fully rational principles and arguments and reasons. But the hype, the hysteria over it, is that not in some way very much like religion? The devoted, the faithful, as the economist calls them, the faithful that believe in these things, that will buy them the moment a new product comes out. These all seem reminiscent of religious leanings. In a 1994 Rolling Stone interview, Jobs said, quote, "But it's not a faith in technology, it's faith in people," end quote. Don't have faith in technology, have faith in people. I'm not clear that that's actually happening, but it's interesting that that line of reasoning even came up with a tech guru, a tech giant like that. Quote from Jobs again: "Technology is nothing. What's important is that you have faith in people. They're basically good and smart, and if you give them tools, they'll do wonderful things with them," end quote. Another quote: "Tools are just tools. They either work or they don't work," end quote. He seems to be pulling at this idea that they're just rational machines again. They're just tools in the hands of people, as if to say they're not supposed to be an object of supernatural devotion. They're not the basis of actual faith. People should be. Well, that's not clearly happening at all. But still, 1973, the famous sci-fi writer Arthur C. Clarke, in his Profiles of the Future, an inquiry into the limits of the possible, said, quote, "Any sufficiently advanced technology is indistinguishable from magic," end quote. So on the one hand, we have Jobs who tells us, listen, don't have faith in the technology, have faith in the people who use the technology. Technology is just a tool. But has culture embraced that view? Well, not really. I think we still largely live in a sort of a religious digiverse in which the technology is something to be adored, venerated, worshipped in some way. I picked up my father's phone the other day. He asked me to take a couple of pictures, and his phone is the latest Samsung phone. And I looked at it and I went, oh, this is so cool. I wish I had it. It does everything my phone does. His phone's just a little bit bigger, larger screen, and a nicer camera. Why? Because again, it's not just a tool, it's a fascination for what the tool can do. It's an engagement with the cultural ethos of the time that says technology is wonderful. On the other hand, we have someone like Clarke who says any sufficiently complex technology, and trust me, my father's phone is complicated, like your phone, it's gonna look like magic. It's complex, we don't understand it, it's going to have that awe, that wonder about it. It's very hard then to just say, oh, it's a tool like a hammer. A hammer is so boring by comparison to, say, a phone. Let's provisionally accept that most people in industrialized nations have some kind of secular faith in technology. We find it magical to some degree. We may not actually believe it to be supernatural, but the hype and the enthusiasm for it certainly sustains it as such. Then when we look at something like Google, we may ask ourselves, as Google, as sort of the tech giant king, one of the few at least, does it have a relationship with the supernatural? Does it have explicit connections with the supernatural? Well, here's one. Traditionally, if you wanted to go to heaven, if you wanted to have an afterlife, you would have to gain access through some kind of religion, at least in the monotheistic context. Today, more and more talk about downloading our brains into the immortal servers that will last forever. We shed our mortal coils, we get rid of our bodies, and we download our brains, and we live immortally on these servers. Is that something you're thinking about, hoping for? I remember watching Tron, I believe it was in the 80s, was the first version of Tron, where they downloaded their brain. Of course, the more updated version of the movie makes it more obvious. Just what are some of these complications where we have bodies, but then we give them up? In Tron, you don't necessarily need to give up your body, but you're living in a digiverse. And of course, as we discussed last time, Google seems to be becoming omniscient. knowing all things, all connected, all powerful, a great monopoly, as a traditional divine would be, controlling all things. But also when Google creates an AI, if it's Google that creates an AI, a personal theism, one that wants to relate to us, perhaps, maybe. We don't know how the AI will pan out. All of these things share direct similarities with religion. But is Google magical? Is it sufficiently complex to induce within you a feeling of awe and wonder? If we loosely define religion then as awe and wonder connected with the magical and supernatural, then yes, in many ways, Google and the other technologies inspire religious inclinations. But you might be thinking, God can read my mind. Can Google or Amazon read my mind? And the answer might be yes. Only God is supposed to know the future, and only God is supposed to know your thoughts. And that's one of the big cornerstones of morality in religion traditionally, is that people behave because they believe God's watching them and God will judge them. And depending on whether or not you want to have a happy afterlife, you'll behave a certain way. Well, today is that Google's job to watch us and to keep us in line. Or in the very least, might we say, it's Google's job to know the future so it can make a profit. Amazon patented a technology called anticipatory shipping. Based on our behaviors from the past, how many products were sold, when and where, maybe even to some degree why, Amazon is able to determine what we're going to buy in the future. Especially around Christmas time, this sort of technology is very important. But the long and the short of it is, this gives them the ability to have a very strong sense of the future, reliably. Fortune tellers, prophets, seers, clairvoyants have routinely throughout history claimed to have a sense of the future, to know what will happen. And yet here we have a mathematically based algorithm that can predict with a very high degree of certainty, this person here is going to need that in the next 48 hours to a month, a year even. So is Amazon reading our mind? Well, no, not really. They're reading past behaviors and predicting future behaviors, but in a very real sense, they're anticipating our minds, our decisions, and the things we'll do. In chapter 1 of Believing in Bits, Simon Natali argues that as early as the 1950s, we can see in cybernetics research and artificial intelligence research that, chatbots and whatnot, that the idea, the vocabulary of mind reading was being used to make sense of computers and as a way of structurally organizing the production or the creation of these programs. Mind reading, well, what is it? Maybe you've seen a hypnotist on stage able to control the minds of other people through suggestion or some kind of programming. He's able to use extrasensory ability to connect with people and to control people. Evidently, by the end of the 19th century, these sorts of stage performances were fairly common in Europe. They combined both that hypnotic, suggestive component, but also a sense of the supernatural or spiritual, that there might be something more going on than just what's conveyed rationally. Mind reading and mind control was so popular that groups as early as the 1880s and 1890s, groups for psychical research, Society for Psychical Research, began looking into these things to try to explain them. And there were two main theories, as you might guess, that still exist to this day. The first theory is that mind reading or mind control, hypnosis is possible because of purely physical factors. That is, you pick up on someone's physical presentation, how they're standing, what they're wearing, and you say something that communicates to them a truth. They find that persuasive, and then they just do what you say because they believe in you, or maybe they do what you say, they look hypnotized because of social pressure. Anyway, there's a physical explanation for why these things are happening. And I'm able to gain access into the truth of your life, even though we've never met, because I'm picking up on physical cues, again, about your life. The other explanation is an extrasensory explanation. Maybe the person who is doing the mind reading, who's doing the hypnosis, the mind control, they're able to pick up on magnetic, electromagnetic waves or something that's not physical in the ordinary sense. It may still be physical ultimately, but they have a sixth sense somehow. Maybe they're spiritually connected somehow. Who knows? So these are parallel explanations. One's more materialistic and reductionistic. We can figure it out based on objective something. The other is obviously more spiritual or religious or supernatural. It was in the 90s, and I went to a place called Eagle's Nest Restoration Center in the province in which I live, and I went with a group of friends, and there was a person there who claimed to be a prophet, and he was able to give people all kinds of information about themselves. And what was interesting about it is that he recorded everything that happened and then gave people a cassette at the end of the night. Already then we have connections between religion or supernatural discourse. I know your future, I know you, I know something important. I'm going to put it on a video cassette, which is technology, magnetically recorded, and then I'm going to give it to you. That adds credibility. So technology that adds credibility to supernatural claims. So that's already very interesting. But what was also interesting, how many people that believed this gentleman because he was so forthright about what he was saying, so bombastic, that this is the truth about you and your future, talking about the future. And yet when you reviewed the tapes, 95% of it was inaccurate. He could tell me, in my case, he actually picked me out of the audience to give me a prophecy of my future. And he talked about music, and he talked about all kinds of things that, to this day, I'm not musical, so I don't have a whole lot of life left, but I still might become musical. Maybe it was a very long prediction. So anyway, he was wildly wrong in my case. But it was very interesting to see how many people found him very, very engaging. Why? Well, again, wonder, awe. Simply the claim to know the future is amazing. And Google and Amazon can pick up on that as well, maybe even a bit more credibly than prophets of old. The apparatus for obtaining criminal confessions, patented in 1927. If you look closely, you'll see this is a skeleton with lights all around it. There are lights in the eye sockets, red lights. There would be a person behind the scenes, behind the curtain, that would speak over a microphone with great authority. And a criminal would come into a room, the lights, the curtains would go up, lights would come on, and they would be shocked by this supernatural apparition. This apparition would command them to tell me your crimes, confess to what you've done. And then this machine would record it. That's key, this machine would record it. It wouldn't just scare them, it would record it. So here too we see a really interesting connection between the supernatural, and the belief in the supernatural, and a reliance on technology. Would you confess your crimes to this skeleton, flashing lights? Well, probably not, because you're conditioned not to really see supernatural in something like that. You would think of a very poor Halloween setup. But at the time, the belief was people saw in things, symbols, skeletons, something more supernatural, like the tarot card that we saw before. It had more meaning then than, say, today. Today, we'd probably laugh if we were in a room with that flashing light skeleton and not confess our crimes. Still, there's a connection there between the supernatural and technology worth thinking about. The only way that machine could fulfill its purpose, its design, was if people believed in the supernatural. If people found fear in something awesome, wondrous, magical, that's the only way it could work. And in some sense, that's the only way Apple can continue to sell products, because we all have phones already, we all have computers already, and we don't need any more of them except for the hype, except for the enthusiasm, the wonder. We need that fix. Clearly, none of us are going to confess our crimes to a 1927 skeleton. But how about to a much more recent neural link device? Here's a video of some pigs. Elon Musk revealed this, it was 2019, and you can see they show the bar graph where the signals are being sent from the pig's brain to a device, and that device sends it wirelessly to the computer, and it gets feedback every time the pig smells something. Interesting. A year later, they released this video of a monkey playing Pong. So the video games, as we talked about in the last video, so it's an old school video game, very simple video game, but the monkey starts by using a joystick to control where the paddles are to push the ball back. The idea is you don't want the ball to go off the screen, so you use the paddles. Okay. But then eventually they're able to remove the joystick altogether, so the monkey is no longer using his hands, he just uses his mind. And the computer is able to predict, based on his muscle interactions and the signals that his brain sent before, where to send the paddle. So now the computer, wirelessly with a device in the monkey's skull, not on the outside, in the monkey's skull with electrodes going into his brain, that was graphic, can control the world around him. Well, in this case, a video game. But fast forward 10 or 15 years, Elon Musk talks a fair bit about how this will help the disabled, gain mobility, gain movement, wonderful. But you know, of course, that for the digital religious enthusiast, whether they have mobility issues or not, that the moment this device is opened on the market, there's going to be a lineup down the street to have people's skulls cracked open and have this device put in. Actually, as part of the video, it shows the machine that would do that under an hour, he says, and hopefully at an affordable price if you want to get your brain actually wired. What's interesting about this device is not just that it will facilitate mind reading, that the computers will literally be able to read our minds, but that through these, we're given divine powers ourselves in many ways, that while technology seems to be connected to all things and all powerful, when we become these cyborgs, these hybrids, we will have these expressive powers to change the world around us. That's interesting and also terrifying, obviously terrifying, but overlapping very much with our discussion about magic, wonder, supernatural. Humans will have supernatural abilities made possible because of technology, abilities we've never had before. From Psalm 139, O Lord, you have searched me and know me. You know when I sit down and when I rise up. You discern my thoughts from afar. You search out my path and my laying down, and are acquainted with all of my ways. Even before a word is on my tongue, behold, O Lord, you know it altogether. I can't help but think, and this is sacrilegious, take out, O Lord, and put in, O Neuralink, you have searched me and you know me, when I sit down, and so on and so on. So might we say technology is magical, awe-inspiring, even seemingly supernatural for some? Absolutely. Thank you, Steve Jobs. Even though you told us not to have faith in technology, we still do. Might we also say that any sufficiently complex technology is like magic? Sure. Can technology read our minds? Sure. Will the merging of the human mind and the digital give us divine-like powers? Absolutely. Might tech giants like Google control our immortal futures, our digital virtual selves? Probably. Is technology en route to having the ability to come into us, into our very minds, and to know our ideas, and to condition and change our ideas and how we interact with the world in a way that only God was said to be able to do before? It's looking that way. Notice also that we're not just talking about mind reading, we're talking about mind control and mind change, actual change of your ideas. So whereas the hypnotist used to go on stage and convince people they were chickens or penguins and all kinds of hilarity would ensue, now the wrong button's pressed, the wrong program is activated, and you're a chicken for life. It's an interesting world, huh?